Building a startup can be pretty difficult, especially for software startups, because you need so many different talents and skills, and even just talking to someone who is on the same page can make a big difference. In this interview, Pavan Konanur, who is the founder of Hoja.ai, a pretty successful educational AI solution, he will share his learnings of how to find the right business partners and how to organize them so that everyone is motivated and their talents are being used in a proper way. He has 4 business partners and 10 employees, so he can tell you what to avoid and what to consider when finding business partners and where to find them. Yeah, could you tell me a little bit like history background about your app and where it is now, like a small summary, where it is now and where it started?
Yeah. Hoja was started about a year and a half ago by myself and my co-founders. So there's 4 of us. So we have the luxury of having a very big team, which is also complex in many ways as well. But we started bootstrapped and kind of something we were talking about and thinking about on the side when we were in other work and other jobs. And you know the high level story. And I can tell you where the idea came from and kind of the aha moment in a second. But where we're at, we kind of built and bootstrapped up until last, let's say, summer. And then we publicly launched our app. It's a B2C AI tutoring, AI tutor and learning platform that focuses on, kids that are in high school, GCSEs, kind of 13 to 17 age range. And we were incredibly lucky and amazed that we thought we would get a few hundred users. We actually got in 3 weeks from launching 10,000 signups and downloads. So and I'm a marketer and I've been around startups a long time. I was being very kind of optimistic about several hundred, and we had several thousands. And so now we're at, I think 60,000 downloads, a lot of people really interested, and of course we're now trying to go to the next stage and the next phase. It's a free app right now, but we're going to then go into new things going forward.
Wow, that's incredible. That sounds like a very interesting story. Let's start from the beginning. How did you start and what were your first reaction and impression? And it probably didn't start immediately with so many users.
Yeah. And even now, the users and the downloads are a huge success and a big testament to our team and all the effort. But equally, there's so much more in terms of, getting people to learn better and keeping them in the platform. But where did it start? The quick story is actually, really, like, my background is in business and marketing. I'm Canadian originally. I started working at Unilever 2 decades ago, and eventually moved overseas to London and started working in tech. I had worked at big tech like Amazon and various different scale-ups and startups like BlaBlaCar and Pecan and all these other really interesting scale-ups and startups in the European community. And I'd always kind of started to see how amazing you could build and grow companies, and sometimes not. But I was very excited by doing that and working with founders and helping them, grow businesses. And then over the last 5 years, I started to invest myself. I started to be an advisor, but also I started to lecture and teach at a apprenticeship college in London. It's a not-for-profit that worked for trying to get kids from different backgrounds to be able to access tech and get university degrees, but also start to work at the companies like Salesforce or Deloitte or things like that. So it was really amazing, really beautiful, but people from very different backgrounds. And I would walk into a classroom and be like, wow, like we're sending a generic set of slides to 50 kids from various different backgrounds, and I knew as a marketer and a person that worked in tech that I can hyper personalize an advertisement to every person in this room, but I'm giving you a generic set of slides. Equally, I felt the pain of, I was doing this almost out of goodwill, but like a lot of teachers don't get paid well or enough for how much hard work they have to do. So they don't have the time and the energy to personalize and customize stuff. So that was kind of a huge kind of aha moment, thinking like, wow, what I'm doing in my tech day job and as a marketer, to what was happening in classrooms, which I really loved teaching and trying to connect with kids, is like this is a mismatch. To connect with people, you have to tell stories that resonate to them in a personal way. And that's really hard for me as a teacher or any teacher to do. But tech can help me, and tech could help that journey. So that was where it came from. Maybe the second piece I can talk about how I met my co-founders if helpful, but I can get onto that after if you want.
Yeah, sure. So you had this idea. How did you start implementing this idea, and how long was the process?
The process was quite, fast and long, depending on how you look at it. So actually, the initial thought, if I even go before Hoja, me and my day job as a marketing professional, working in tech, I saw AI coming, and I really thought that it was going to disrupt and change how I worked, maybe even take my job. And so I thought, hey, I need to be very kind of in tune with this. So one of my old colleagues and friends, we started to play around with AI and marketing solutions. And actually his other friend was a developer. And so the three of us were just playing with AI and marketing and stuff like this. And so that background is actually really important because it gave us a lot of insight on how to use AI, LLMs, new tools that were popping up every day. And I think everyone realizes it now, but it was just a learning platform for us in our spare time to see what we could do. In the end, we built a prototype for this other marketing tool, but we ended up wanting to actually work on the education problem that I discussed. And so we transferred all of our insights and knowledge from AI to this problem on education. That started in January of last year. And we started talking to a lot of teachers, talking to a lot of students, parents, and really trying to get user insights, but also prototyping and building an MVP. So it took probably some months before on learning a lot about LLMs and AI and APIs, and then several months of like user testing, prototyping, putting stuff out there. And we were extra cautious because it was an education tool, and we wanted to make sure it was safe and had a lot of like guardrails in place for students in particular.
At what point did you decide that you need business partners?
Yeah, I think from the beginning we had business partners. For me, my experience, I've seen very few solo founders. I think it's actually incredible when you can have a solo founder. I also think it's really difficult, and also as an investor, I always used to think that there was possibly what happens if something happens to that person or they have a bad week. So I always liked actually more 2 or 3 people. We actually have 4 now. And so I thought it was important from the beginning to have a diverse team that had different skill sets, and kind of split the pie and move faster. I think convincing people to work on a journey and a dream that maybe they didn't exactly think so is really a big thing. But I thought right from the beginning it would be helpful, and really I started ideating and building stuff with people right away.
How did you choose the right people?
Yeah, I think it's very difficult. And we've been lucky so far that it's all worked out. But you hear a lot of stories about founders breaking up and how
Yeah.
joining with founders is bigger than marriage. And so it really is true. I think that there's a lot there. In my case, the story really quickly was that one of my co-founders, Shez, we worked together at a previous startup. I came in as kind of a 1-year contract to help out his team. And I loved him. I thought he was a unicorn, a special breed of creative and analytical and technical. And so I said, I want to work with him again in the future. And we got along as friends. And so I thought I would invest in him because I figured he would do a startup. And I said, maybe we'll work together more personally. And in the end, we kept as friends, and then we became colleagues now. And so I think that's a really special way to be able to have the luxury to test and work with people. And so we did it in a work setting, and then we did stuff on our side time. And then my third co-founder was Shazad's classmate from university, and also a developer, which of course is a very special thing to have on a team, and able to make you test and grow faster. And then we actually have a fourth co-founder, Katya. She joined us later in the journey, a few months later, and we were put in touch by someone tagging us on LinkedIn. And I thought her profile was amazing. She's an educator, and kind of like the final piece of our puzzle. But we just chatted to see how we can trade notes, and really quickly after an hour, it was like, how can we work together? And actually, we joined, and she joined our team as a co-founder without even meeting in person after like several weeks. Again, big bets. Sometimes they can backfire. In our case, it really did work out. But the connection there was like mutual friends, and so there was a lot of vetting, I think, from being safe that way. So I think when picking a co-founder, having some network or some way of validating, because there's a lot of things that you can't figure out in interviews and conversations, but maybe through other people's friendships or experiences, you can pick up on that.
Did you have already in mind when you started which kind of business partners or employees you would like to have, and then you were kind of looking out for them, or they just came and you realized, oh, that would be really good to have those people?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think it was definitely more thoughtful. When I started, I'm not technical in terms of like I can't code, although I've looked at coding and tried it long ago. But I knew that was not my skill set. So I always figured that it would be helpful if and when I started a company to have people that were more technical. And so to complement my skill set. And then once we went more and more into an education a platform, it became very apparent that it would be helpful to have someone with that experience, but also someone that wanted to change it, not just a teacher or someone in a school, someone that wanted to disrupt it. And that's where we always thought that would be an incredible profile to have, but we could make do without it. And so it was a bit of both, that if that came along opportunistically, which it did, luckily, it was amazing to have. And so it was trying to balance and be more thoughtful in like, hey, we want to have technical, non-technical, growth and marketing and sales, and also education in our case. So some domain specificity.
Yeah, I can imagine that teachers, they might start and want to change the system, but after working for 40 years, it's probably very difficult for them to be innovative and to go with completely new approaches. So yeah, you probably need a specific person who is still be open for that.
Yeah, totally. One of my mentors and currently an investor is in our company. He started a company called Pecan. And this company was a B2B SaaS company in HR. They eventually got bought by Workday. Incredible success story. I was their CMO, and I worked with them for about a year. I learned a lot. Four founders, really incredible story. And one of the takeaways I always took from that story was none of them were deep HR professionals. And of course, they talked to people in the industry and were very empathetic and listened. But one of the things they always said, and my mentor says to me, and my investor and advisor says, it was like that, sometimes it's better to not be from the system so that you can have a fresh perspective and also have the courage to disrupt it, I think, right? Because to your point, if you've been in it for so long, maybe you don't even, don't know where to start, or you get stuck in what you always do. And so I find that a lot in education right now. It's really tricky because people, it's not necessarily the first mover with tech and advancing tools. And I think HR, which was this other example, historically wasn't either. So it always kind of stuck true to me. And so the education piece was for the right person. And so as someone who wanted to innovate and disrupt, but also had that kind of more research-backed mentality.
Yes, I can imagine that. I used to live in Germany, and everything seemed to be normal. And now I moved out to Germany, and when I come back to Germany, I realize so many things are so strange. It doesn't
Yeah.
don't make sense at all. But for people, it's totally normal.
Yes, exactly. You get into the groove of things, and then you don't see, right?
You don't even see what is not what could be optimized. Did you have some aha moments, some challenges, lessons before the launch or during the launch?
Definitely. I think that before well, maybe just a few big ideas and thoughts that we've reflected on. As I was saying, we started last January. We had a product quite quickly, and of course iterated, and it was an MVP, and got a lot of really good feedback from users or potential users. And I would say probably by May of last year, we had a product that we could have put out in the world. And for numerous reasons, we wanted to add extra features or make it better. And of course, there was always this underlying piece of education and safety and things like that. But the big learning was that, again, we probably waited until from May till end of summer, October, November, to really publicly push the product. And of course, it was better in terms of features and design, but I think the core of it was really good already in May. And so my lesson, as I look backwards and even look now, is at some point to make yourself uncomfortable and put something out into the world faster than you would expect, just to get the learning in reality, because there's no better learning, right? And testing in isolation is actually really, really good to rapidly prototype. But then how quickly you can put it into the market was a big learning. And again, in our case, it was like, oh, wow, we probably, had we started publicly 3 months earlier, would have just been along the pathway even more. Obviously, that might not be the case for everyone. They could do that same thing and it not work. But generally, I think the feedback you get when you put things out uncomfortably fast is a really big lesson and learning that we took from the last year.
In your team, were there different opinions on when to launch?
Yeah, I think that's definitely a piece of it. There were different thought processes in terms of like, hey, is the product ready from a tech perspective? Do we have all the right features? Can we coordinate it all so that we align with an iOS and an Android app and the web app, all of it together, so we can make it more efficient when we do marketing? From my perspective, maybe talking to schools and teachers, it's like, are they ready for this yet? And so definitely there was a lot of like hesitation, I think, and so less so different opinions, but a lot of reasons why not to do it. And sometimes I think you'll always have those reasons, and there, you have to be brave enough to just do it, right? And then, but equally to your point, when you have multiple people, you have to kind of find a way to bring them all into one shared vision. So yeah, that was another piece of it as well.
I can imagine that certain backgrounds, like IT developers, for example, they might probably be more inclined into postponing the launch to
Yeah.
make it even more polished.
Yes. Yeah. Exactly. I think the more technical you are, it's your baby and you're building it, and you know that it could be better if you just were given more time, right? And sometimes good enough is actually really good. So yeah, there was definitely, depending on the background. And also I think the other thing, we'd all worked with startups or tech companies, but it was our first time running and starting a company. And I think it's a huge lesson to learn that like it's very different than working at a little bit more mature of a company or a very big one. You could have worked in tech and you could have worked with startup, but you create it from the ground up. It will never get to that point that it would have been had we had a big team or we're at a bigger company. And so again, like what we were comfortable or used to was not necessarily applicable here.
How was the decision to launch? Did you had to convince some team members or to push, or was it or everyone was agreeing?
Everyone was agreeing. It was just probably how fast we would do it. And then again, maybe trying again in retrospect, maybe we could have just tried it without some pieces of the puzzle being there. But everyone generally wanted to kind of publicly push it, and it was just like timing. And I think the other lesson, actually, if you don't look back on the last year and a half, the other aha moment, you have such limited time and resources. Focus is a huge thing. And I always call it, I say to people, like, we have positive problems. And in our case, we had multiple founders. We had a lot of people that wanted to partner and work with us. We had schools that wanted to test it. We had consumers that we were going after directly. And you can't do everything. And all of these target audiences, all of these features cater to different people. And so that also kind of pushed and delayed things, because we would say, hey, this organization, we worked with the United Nations to do a pilot with them, which is incredible. And like we, got to go to the UN's office and run a really successful pilot, but it was a little different than us doing B2C, consumer, high school. And that kind of also distracted us for a few months. In the end, it might have been the best thing that ever happened to us. But again, I think trying to figure out where to deviate or how focused to be or not, that's really tricky, because you just have limited resources, probably in every organization and every project, but I think it's more amplified in a startup.
How would you make this decision? In retrospect, it's much easier to see what worked and what was more effective. But when you don't have this information, how do you did you find some solutions, advice, how to figure out how to prioritize certain things?
Yeah, I think trial and error now, but I think advisors have been really helpful. People, again, when you look at even that example of, hey, we're not necessarily all from education as teachers for 40 years. So you get to see it from a different perspective. So advisors have been super useful to come to them and explain what we're doing. And then they're saying, like, really, can you do that? Or is that the right thing to do? And you're like, oh, I didn't even think about that. So that was really helpful to have a lot of good advisors and now some investors that can play that role. So you don't get lost in your own thoughts and decision making. And then now I think that we maybe have learned the lesson. It's having like a bit of like discipline and forcing mechanism. So when things come up, to have evaluation criteria to really assess how much time it will take. And really talk about the trade-offs. And I think it really is hard to say no to really interesting things. So to be comfortable with having difficult conversations with yourself, with your team. And I think the more we talked, the more people got used to that discomfort. One other thing that was helpful for some of this, we went through an accelerator. We went through several accelerator programs, or programs where they help you. NVIDIA, Microsoft, Google. There's a couple education specific ones. One called Hoja.ai, and they provided us a coach for 4 months. And I'd never used a coach in that capacity. And it was a coach for me as the CEO, but then we used our coach Mary for all 4 of us as founders, and it was a really excellent way to force discussions and conversations that you might not have had normally, and start to understand, like, hey, people may or may not have had issues, or maybe you can figure out a process or a way to talk about it. So really, structure and process can really help you. And of course, you can't overdo it, but little bits of frameworks and processes and having other external points of view.
Which kind of coach was it? Was it an expert in certain areas, or was it an expert in making decisions?
It was more I would say a generalist coach that was there to kind of help across multiple things. Someone who'd had lots of experience in tech and business, and was really there to just kind of be a sounding board. I have taught about entrepreneurship for the last several years. That's actually what I was teaching. And I would always, tell people and hear from entrepreneurs, and they would always say how lonely it is. And actually the coach plays a really amazing role because you're kind of in very small teams, and you have a sounding board that's even arguably better than an investor and or an advisor, because they're literally, their job is to listen to you and ask you questions. And so it wasn't specialist, although I could see how that would be helpful too if we don't know enough about education or AI or something. That's also helpful.
Yeah, I also have experience with coaches, and I understand what you mean. It's really valuable. Sometimes even saying out loud ideas, it's already your brain processes your own ideas differently when you say it out loud. And those coaches, they have those certain tools to make better decisions and to choose, and they don't necessarily need to have this experience what you are lacking. They just there to listen and to use their approaches to make the best out of your own brain and your own ideas. It can be very, very helpful. Yeah.
Yeah, totally. And in the end, we don't use a coach now, but we learned a lot of techniques and processes, and even just how to share better and who's talking too much or how to make people talk more. And so that was, learning the tools and the techniques, to your point, of what the coaches might bring, was really helpful. But yeah, so I think processes of some sort, having ways to document things, ways to evaluate what people are doing, things that but more so sharing and talking, right? I think that's very valuable, and saying it out loud, to your point.
In regards to focus, I also see it as a very important part. And I think we have so many options nowadays, which makes it even more difficult sometimes. And it always feels that there is something even better, even has much more potential, a marketing channel that is undiscovered, a business direction, a target audience. And the danger is always to jump from one thing to another, and without completing the one thing that you already started. And it's when you stop doing that, you realize how much actually improvement you can do within one particular thing before you jump to another. And it's also a little bit like in our mind to change this up, the thinking of, I might missing out. I want the best of the best. I want to find the niche that is totally without any competition or something. And instead of that, to understand that everything looks much better from outside. And in the end, it's also hard work, and maybe not always fancy work, just maybe sometimes even boring work. And when you look from outside, it looks like, wow, incredible. You are doing those videos or those cover interviews or something. But in the background, there is a lot of boring work that is not appreciated all the time.
Yeah, totally. I agree. I think I think it's a really nice segue from process, right? And process is not a fun or sexy word, and people don't like it. And equally, having conversations can be not fun or uncomfortable, but it's important to surface things. And yeah, I agree. I've been very guilty of it. I see something new, and I'm like, oh wow, talking avatar. How do we build that? And then you kind of go in this rabbit hole, or an investor says something, or a competitor launches. And I think, it's important to be aware, and maybe plan and see or evaluate, put some resource to it, but not to deviate completely. And I think I that's a big lesson for me personally, and equally when you're working with other people, not to just say, hey, I want to go do that, or that's really neat, to be very thoughtful about how you even talk about those new things, because people might get the wrong impression or get demotivated. And that's been a really interesting learning as well. It's really important, I think, to especially now in AI and tech, and to be aware of what's happening so you can use the tools, but maybe not necessarily to divert completely. But maybe there is a time where you have to throw away an MVP to change. But even then, I think it has to be very thoughtful in terms of how you evaluate it, how you talk about it, and really it becomes very personal. I think you mentioned something about launching a product and the developer maybe not wanting to put it out there, but like when you build whatever you're building, what I'm learning is it becomes very personal, right? It's your brand, it's your baby, it's your product. And so if someone wants to change it, whether it be your co-founder or your team or your investor, it can be very personally hurtful. So I think there's a whole underlayer to startups and founding companies that is about emotions and feelings that I think we don't talk about nearly enough.
Oh yes, that's so important. I think also having different type of people is also, and understanding that they act totally different, their brain works totally different. You mentioned to structure the meetings so that everyone has a certain amount of equal time to talk, because certain professions like sales or marketing, they are so maybe creative, and they are so outgoing, and they can talk for 90% of the time. But the developers or the quieter, there is an ocean of value inside them, but they are not able to express it as fast as possible. And it's not about, I was also in our dynamic with my own marketing agency. I have a technical business partner, and sometimes I was overwhelming him with my ideas. And I thought I'm creative, and startup is all about creativity. But then I or even like marketing agencies, small marketing agencies, it's all about creativity and trying new different things every week. But yeah, with times I realized you waste so much time by trying new things all the time, and there is so much value in those people, but you have to unlock it, and you have to be sometimes for those people who are too outgoing, too creative, you have to slow them down, and those people who are quiet, you have to pull the knowledge out of them.
Yeah, it's really true, and I'm guilty of being the one that speaks too much, and equally, I've seen the power in giving the platform to others. Was really helpful when we started to be more conscious of this. And so yeah, it's a really great point. And equally, I think the other way, learning from, I've always said this in any company I've worked with, my brain doesn't work like an engineer's does. But wow, it's incredible to see the structure and the process and the mechanics that are used, that can be very helpful in other parts of the business. So again, that cross collaboration is so wonderful, and really I think having multiple co-founders is again, it's challenging because you have to manage people's thoughts and feelings and be more democratic, but it really can add so much value if used properly.
Yeah, I also realized that if you have many ideas and if you implement many ideas, you don't, as a marketing person or non-technical person, you don't even realize how much more complex the whole product or the process becomes in the background, and it becomes like a cart house. If you change something, then all the other things stopped working because it's just full of features. And for creative creative people, it's so easy to come up with some ideas, but for the developer, he has to balance so many other things in his mind and in the code, so that yeah, it's very valuable to listen to them and to not to overdo with the new ideas.
Yeah, exactly. And maybe the opposite side of that, at least I've seen, is having kind of a more empathy and user-centric view, right? And balancing the complexity on building the product, focus, but also then what is the right bet? Which is the feature we should launch? Is it the one that I think is really neat, or something that came on the news yesterday, or oh, I talked to so many users, or I talked to so many potential users, and they all said this, right? And so that like putting myself in their shoes, talking to them, doing like rapid user testing, that I think is such an art as well, and one we're still figuring out how to do it like well. But I think there's so much value that you can get from talking to the people that you're trying to serve. That there is a problem you're trying to fix, and you have to fix it the way the user will want in some ways. And they might not be able to express it, but finding ways to discuss it with them. And so then marrying that up to the technical solution and then doing it in a logical, practical way, it's really tricky. I definitely have found the whole process like a very much a learning pathway for myself.
The developers, they are oftentimes also so fascinated about the technical possibilities, so
Yes.
that they are implementing features and working on things like speed. They are obsessed about milliseconds, and maybe for the user, he doesn't care if it's 0.1 second faster or slower. He cares maybe about simplicity, and less features is better maybe for the user. So yeah, you need to balance all those different types of people. What do you think is the difference between if you, instead of having founders, if you hired those people, those experts?
Yeah, that's a really, really good point as well. We actually now have a team as well. So we're 10 people. And so we kind of see how it works with employees. But let's just say with founders or like executive level team members, if you were hiring them, I think that one of the differences is that if they're really partners and co-founders, whatever that means, if they have equity stakes that are meaningful, it becomes more than just a job. It becomes something I think that you naturally have more invested in technically, but equally like you care about it. And I think that's really hard to replicate by just hiring people, because then I think it becomes just a job. Which is totally fine, and people care about their jobs, but I think there's a bit of a difference sometimes, and I think the other thing is inherently, at least when my experience, I was the CMO at 5 or 6 different really amazing startups and scale ups. I sat on management teams, and I was in all the discussions about strategy and people, and I really did have a seat at the table, but there was a difference. It wasn't my company. There was kind of a layer on top naturally, and so as much as it was maybe something that I felt a little bit distant from. It made sense also because I could leave and I didn't have to stay the same way that they did, or I didn't have the same vesting. And so I think there is a big difference. But I think if you give people enough, compensation, autonomy, the right level of authority, you can equally hire for really important roles. And I actually would take that to how you have employees too, right? At lower levels or different levels, that you can give them power and autonomy and respect and bring them into like just equals. We looked at examples of how companies ran very flat organizations, no titles, no roles. Everyone just kind of was an equal. We haven't quite gone that path yet. Maybe one day we will, but I believe very much in there's a beauty in just like letting people all be flat and equal. But it's still not the case until you make it that way.
I was active in a startup that was very flat.
Mm-hmm.
And the problem was everyone came up with thousands of ideas, and no one knew which of those ideas should we follow. And the boss, the owner of the startup, was saying, I hired such great employees, such top people. I thought it will be organized by itself. You will organize yourself by yourself. But in reality, it also doesn't work.
Yeah, I agree. I think there's a fine balance between leading and motivating or giving people autonomy. Because you're right, someone needs to ultimately, you need a structure or at a minimum, or someone to kind of help and guide and shepherd. I think it's really helpful to have. But I think doing it in a tasteful and a tactful way versus just telling people what to do is probably the art of this that's really difficult.
How do you do it in your startup with decision making? Is there a one person, or do you equally decide?
We actually spent a lot of time on this because I think we were stepping on each other's toes a little.
Mhm.
Again, the pro and the con to having multiple co-founders, and especially capable ones that could do multiple different things. So I think at the beginning, and even still now, where we're still, are we at product market fit? Are we going to scale? Whatever the case is, there's a lot of value from bringing multiple opinions to the table. But what we started to do was at some point transition from a 3-4 of us just working on a problem, trying to really just get it done, to we're a little bit bigger, or we can silo a little bit. And so you're saying that, like, hey, you have decision and autonomy on this, but please keep everyone posted. And so that's when communication and sharing became really important. We put management meetings in. We had documents that people would just write so everyone could keep a track of. We're also remote first. We have people across Europe, North America for some interns, Asia for our team. And so documenting became more important, and especially as you start to deviate into different lanes. But yeah, so decision making for us has really kind of gone from the first few people to then, when we have more scope and more roles, to then give people autonomy. But then we actually really were clear about it. You own the product vision, but we want you to share it. You were doing all the technical stuff, but can you tell us what's releasing and when? Where can we input? Where shouldn't we input? Where is it okay? Where is it not? And that was really important. And then ultimately, I do think, at least in my role as the CEO, having a little bit of oversight on everything has been helpful. But equally, not overstepping and saying, I'm the CEO, so I can tell you what to do. It's just maybe I can help tie the pieces together because I hear or see more, versus others might be more focused. So, but yeah, it was a very big process. Actually, our coach helped us a lot with decision making, and we talked about different structures and things. We're very European. Our CTO is ex Spotify and lives in
Wow.
Sweden, and so if anyone knows about the tribes and squads model of Spotify, and the very Nordic culture of collaboration. It's actually very beautiful, but it's also very time consuming and difficult. And some of us are North American, myself, where it's a little bit more hierarchical. And so trying to balance these things and figure out the right levels is sometimes a bit tricky. And culturally, it makes it very, very different as well, which I'm learning.
I can also imagine that certain experts, certain specialists, they are really good in certain stage of a startup when it's small, maybe, but then when it becomes bigger, when processes, when organizational structure is becoming more important, then they might lack certain things. Did you have this kind of challenge, and how did you deal with that?
Yeah, and maybe even beyond lack, maybe they just don't like it, right?
Yeah.
And so, or it's the first time they're doing it, being an employee at a big tech company versus now managing a team, going from 3 people trying to ideate and create a solution to now managing people. So definitely was something that happened for us. And I actually think I had the reverse issue. I think as the company grows and scales, it feels more comfortable to me. But the beginning was really hard. And so I really surrounded myself with co-founders that were really good at building and putting stuff out there, more comfortable to say stuff, and so it was really nice. And now as we flip it, I can start to put in, or someone can start to put in process. And I think the learning is that you try not to force people to do it, but also show the value. And then if people don't like it, try and find a different solution, try and help them. It's something that I'm still kind of figuring out. The other thing that I thought was really helpful is, again, as people grow into new roles or take on new roles, mentors. It is so helpful. Our CTO has plugged into a few mentor networks, and I was kind of curious what he would get from it, and he seemed to love it, and was like, wow, this person was so amazing and helpful. And people are very generous with their time. If they're not generous with their time, you can always find more structured mentors if you don't have them. And so, yeah, so I think, our chief product officer or growth officer, again, we brought in, asked our friends, asked our network to mentor. And it's so helpful because then they give a different viewpoint, and they also get, it's someone you respect and trust, which is not necessarily your co-founder or your CEO. So I think that's a really helpful tactic.
So you use the network of each of the founders and maybe even employees and see which kind of experts they know there. And then you get together and talk a little bit, try to learn from this expert, tell them and brainstorm maybe what your problems are. And it's very helpful. Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, generally, we've been really good at trying to tap into networks and ask people and get just advice an hour here, talk about a problem, hear about a business. But then I think equally just structure, like, hey, you've been a CTO, you've been a chief product officer, you've run an education company. Can you help me a little bit more than a one-off chat? And people have been really generous with their time. And of course, as we grow and get bigger, we'd love to maybe formalize those things. But at the beginning, I think it's just people's kindness, and surprising how much people want to help. And it might also be the domain we're in. People really want to be part of education and help with that problem. But I think more broadly, people like to help.
Interesting. Yeah. The excuse of not having enough money for experts, for consultants, doesn't work in that case, because you can always find people who are happy to help for free.
I mean, yeah, maybe we've been lucky, but I think if I just take it from my perspective, when someone asks me if I can help them, I'll try my best. And the closer they are to me, I'll try even more. And the more I like what they're working on, even more, right? And usually those are the people that are very amazing, where it's just like they care, or they want to help, or they have time, or they make time. I actually think when you start structuring it and paying for it, that can be helpful to agree to get process or to make sure it's regular. But ultimately, still, I think the people should care and want to help. So that should be the initial criteria. But yes, I think it you'd be surprised what you can get if you ask. We might also just be very lucky that we have a good network.
Which kind of best practice or mistakes can you say about choosing the right business partners in general?
One piece would be to try and test and work with people if you have that ability or luxury before you formalize things, even if it's 2 days or one project, or if you had the chance to work with them in the past. I think that's a really helpful signal. As I was saying earlier, I think it's not referencing like you would do for like a reference check, but finding stuff in common and talking to people that have had similar experiences with those people, both ways, right? I think that's really, really valuable and helpful. I think the mistakes can be that, also that you don't do all the formalities. There's agreements, there's contracts, there's equity, there's how are you going to leave or share, or what happens if we don't like each other, if it doesn't work out, if you run out of money. That is a really big thing that people, again, I think don't like, because you're talking about things that are bad. And it's also, most people don't like looking at legal paperwork, but I think it's really important to do. And so there's a lot of amazing free resources, again, out there where people want to help, because if you get a founder's agreement, and I use a service or a provider, then maybe I'll go to that same provider to get legal help later. So they give a lot of the tools up front for free. And so I was really amazed with how much help and support there was, but equally how complex if we didn't have it. And we've been lucky not to have any breakups yet. But I've seen in the past companies I've worked at, a founder left, someone who had equity didn't work out, and having the right things in place, you know, would help that.
You mentioned in the beginning that you had over 10,000 users in 3 weeks. How did it happen?
Yeah, it's a good question. It wasn't just magic, but what we were, having a couple hundred users, several hundred users from word of mouth, our network, things like that. But then we put on advertising marketing, but we did pretty basic Google AdWords. For anyone that understands what Google AdWords is, like obviously when you're on Google, there's an ad that pops up, or maybe in an app store or things like that. But what it showed was it was intent based. So people were already looking for this stuff. And so it validated our hypothesis that the market was really big and people wanted it and needed it. And we were shocked at how big that market really was that we could tap into, and how cheap it was to tap into it, i.e. that our ad costs were really low. So what we proved was that we can actually reach people quite quickly, quite fast, with very easy, cost-efficient marketing. And so it scaled really fast, and we were quite amazed by that. And I think we have a lot of untapped channels still. But that was the big thing. We also think now, like, community building and other channels, as I was saying, will be possibly another way to continue to grow and get more people to download or try the product.
Do you analyze those users, how active they are, where they are from?
Yeah. We actually at the beginning we hadn't had it all set up because we just didn't think we would grow so fast, and so we were like, wow, we grew, or where so many people are coming. We had basic analytics that came from our applications or our databases, and from Firebase. We use Firebase as a platform, and it was like, okay, this is okay, but we're missing a lot of stuff, and even accessing the data we had within our platform takes some effort and manipulation, and so we didn't have it set up, and so we actually scrambled really quickly to try and get it set up. Now we have someone on the team that works on analytics. We set up a tool called Mixpanel to pull everything in, and another tool called Looker. So we have dashboards, we can see everything, we can track where people are going, how much they're using the application. But equally, we also put in place things like feedback forms or reviews where we can ask people like, hey, what do you want? How can we help you? And so we equally use that. And so the whole point is to try and make the experience as positive as possible. And that's why we have data and analytics and kind of getting insights to help build the product.
Yeah, startup is all about learning, isn't it?
Yeah, never ending learning. Personally, yes. Professionally, talking to users, it's really a lot of learning, and more than you could ever, I think, do and it's all in one job, and it's a lot of context switching. And so, yeah, it's a ton of learning.
Yes. Yeah, thank you so much. It was so much valuable advice. Do you have something what you would like to tell our audience?
Yeah, maybe just my closing thoughts as I think about our journey and doing what we're doing. I think startups are incredibly fun and really it can be very powerful to disrupt and change or do something different, solve a problem. But I also think that doing something that you care about, whatever you care about, that might be making money, that might be doing something creative. In our case, it's about really transforming education, and our motivations all stem from really big places, from what our experiences were growing up with maybe very little, to teaching in a classroom, to seeing the power that we could have to help our children, right? And so having that big motivation really keeps you going, because the journey can be really tough. Sometimes it's not as rewarding up front. So you need other things to keep you motivated. And so that's a big lesson, is to really care about what you're doing to get you through the tough parts.
Yeah, that's a very, very good advice. I know it from myself. Yes, I also changed my perspective on that, on focusing on being passionate about certain things. It's one of the main motivators. I'm also very passionate about education because I feel like so many problems will disappear with a better education if people have better understanding of the world. So yeah, I'm really happy to have had you on this podcast, and I wish you a lot of success with your startup.
Thank you. And it was great to chat. Really interesting conversation. And actually, to your last point, really quickly, we have this quote on a lot of our presentations. It's a quote from Nelson Mandela that says that like education is the most powerful weapon that can change the world, right? And when you think about how powerful that sentiment is, that's why I think it's really learning ourselves, but even helping other people learn is such a beautiful thing. And yeah, if anyone wants to see what we're doing, it's Hoja.ai, Hoja.ai, and come help, come see, come use. We'd love feedback and any inputs from everyone. We've all been a learner at some point. So thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me.
Thank you. Bye bye, Pav.